Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me Stories of Hope, Gratitude, and Resilience. Today, we are so fortunate to have as our guest Edward Mosley Jr. He is a retired Marine combat veteran with 22 years of honorable service, a consummate professional speaker, and an internationally recognized expert leadership coach. Well known as Coach Mo, he has earned his respect and place as one of the most exciting, transparent, authentic, and charismatic speakers worldwide, delivering thought provoking strategies that have an immediate life changing impact. Welcome, welcome, Edward. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Kelly, for inviting me, and I'm just excited to be here as well.
So, before we kind of jump in, if you could just, for our listeners who may not know about your work, can you briefly share a little bit about your background and kind of the path that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, thank you. So where I am today is definitely has been a journey. Um, and as you read in the bio, retired Marine, 22 years, served in combat. Um, and how did I get here today? So about 14 years ago, in 2010, was one of the I guess one of the worst, the heaviest, hardest years that I had in my life. And it was in a probably about a 2 to 3 year stretch, but everything started around that time. So, here I am, this strong, educated leader, careers going awesome and things of that nature. And certain tragedies happened. And so first it started with my previous mother-in-law being diagnosed with lung cancer, and she's sick, and she's at a point where she's on hospice,
Hmm.
and then she passes away in April of 2010. And but at the same time there, my previous wife, she notices that she's not feeling well, and she decides that once everything's taken care of with the mom, that she's going to go to the doctor to be checked out and see what's going on with her. And so she goes to the doctor around that April May timeframe of 2010, and she is diagnosed with appendix cancer.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, very very rare. And
Yeah.
so she passes away in October of 2010. And so you we had three children,
Yeah.
10 years old, 16, 19-year old. And we go from, losing the mother-in-law to losing the mom to now
Yeah.
it's just me. And so this all started in birth out of all of that. My first book, The Journey of a Faith Walker, A Broken Man, it's
Hmm.
from a man's perspective on dealing with, loss, um, um, grieving, pain, my faith in God, peace, love, and and then being a father, being a parent. Now I'm a single parent, and I had to deal with the girls' conversations, and those questions of, well, why did mom leave me, and where's my mom, and how do you deal with that? So I went through a lot of chaos myself. So
Yes.
I called it leadership in chaos, and that's how this whole journey of speaking and coaching kind of started. That's how it birthed, and what I had to realize was that um, I had to be I wasn't strong anymore. You talked about I listened to one of your clips where you talked about you know chaos and grieving and pain, but from a man's perspective, it's a little different. And so
It
I
is.
noticed that men, we don't openly and outwardly express things that we're going through because we have to be strong. And one of the things that I had to realize was that I wasn't Superman, and I had to take that cape off. And I couldn't walk around with this facade on any longer because it was hurting me on the inside, but it was not doing any good for anybody around me on the outside. And
Right.
so I noticed that as I was going to work, I finally made it back to work, and then my chief of staff, he terminated me. I lost my job, and his reasoning was I was not at work doing my job. but I was approved to be at home taking care of my wife and my mother-in-law who's had just passed away.
Right.
So that showed me that there was no empathy in leadership, there was no sympathy, there was nothing. And so
Yeah.
I go from, we go from having two incomes to one income to no income. And everybody's looking at me like, Dad, how are we going? What are we doing? And that's when everything just kind of just birthed in me to share with other people things that I have went through,
Yeah.
how I maneuvered things and how I made it through. And so when you see me from where I was to what you see now, it's totally different. And so
Yeah.
my healing and my strength comes through um sharing my story to people, but also showing them where I am now and how
Right.
I got there, and the steps I took to go from broken to healed. So, that's kind of a long, short story, but that's how we got here.
Uh, I mean, I can't imagine what you and your children experienced, and as a father, what that meant for you. And um, I understand very much what you're saying about men and grief and emotion and how it is expressed differently. My husband and I grieved in very different ways,
Yeah.
and it can create a miscommunication because
Yeah.
you really do have to make an effort for people to understand where you are.
Mhm.
First, before I go another step, I have to say thank you for your service, because that's very important and
Thank you.
very appreciated. So I can't go another second without doing that.
Thank you.
Um, so when you said you birthed this, and that really resonates with me because I do feel like we're presented with these moments and these things that happen in our lives, and that we have an opportunity if we listen to, like you said, with your faith,
Yeah.
to take pain and turn it into purpose.
Yeah.
So when you started, so you were in this space where everything was coming at you at the same time. So when did you decide, okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to make something out of this, and I am going to take this out to the world so that we can create more empathetic leadership, more authenticity in our relationships? How did that all start?
Yeah. That was, you know, I've wrote about, I wrote about this and I talk about it a lot. Um, it took it took me 6 years to finally kind of, I guess, get out of my own way. Um, but
Yeah.
within that 6 year period, I got in trouble a lot. I got in trouble with the police officer, law enforcement. Um, I was just spiraling out of control. My dad. There's a phrase that he said years ago. It has stuck with me. But he said I was a sinking ship. And
Mm,
the more I thought about that, and the more financial issues and just life issues that kept coming up, I think what really got me was, I called it a vacation. Well, I was putting a phrase on it because I wanted to make it sound better than
mhm.
it really was. But I had got in trouble. I had got a DUI,
Okay.
and it happened. I had two, right? And each of the DUIs that I got was on significant days. So like one was on an anniversary and one was
Mm,
on a birthday. And one of the things that I did that I didn't know that I was doing was I was isolating myself. And I my healing or my medication was alcohol.
yeah.
And the one thing that got me was, I got in the last time, it was at the point to where I could have been, locked up for some time, right? And thank
Yep.
God that I didn't hurt anybody or anything like that. But when the police officer pulled me over, I think I was so exhausted and so tired of just chaos and just trying to find a good and a bad and that type of thing, to where when he asked me, had you been drinking, my normal response was no, or I had no, only had one or whatever. I think I was so tired of just the way I was, to where I was just like, yes. I just, at that
Mm.
point, I just became honest with what was going on in my life, and I didn't like it. And I was putting so many other people, especially my children, I was putting them in just in a in a in a in a world of chaos, And
Yeah.
so, I made it through those things, and I went to my little weekend where I had to go do some things, and kind of stay away for a couple weeks. And during that time, I noticed, and I, was talking to different people, and I just knew that wasn't the life that I wanted. There was so many other things that I wanted to do in life. And then, so then that was kind of a turning point. And then the one thing that really got me was, I thought that I was more valuable and worth more not being here. So I contemplated suicide.
Mm.
I went as far as, I had everything set. I was, just a moment away from doing it.
Yeah.
And the thing that got me was, you know, it was a selfish move, and that if I were to do that to myself, then my kids would have nobody.
Right.
So they would have lost their mother, their grandmother, and then, I go and, take my own life. And when I started to really get those things in my head, it's like, wait a minute, this is not where I want to be. And I was 40 at the time, so
Yeah.
so young. And it was those kind of things that really made me, really sit down. Um, that's when I finally said I need to get some counseling. I finally, at the 6 year mark, went and got some counseling. And
Yeah.
in the room, let's say if there was 10 people, by the time it got to me, um, that was the now they say, yeah, my husband was killed in combat, or blah blah blah, whatever, whatever. And by the time it got to me, and I introduced myself, that was the first time, Kelly, that I said, "Hey, my name is Edward, and my wife died. She's gone." I would always say she was in heaven, and that was
Yeah.
the first time I had ever said it. And I noticed immediately when I said it, I felt like this weight had been lifted off of me, and that
Yeah.
was the first time that I had actually accepted what was happening. And so I think that for me, that was the first part of the steps of accepting what had happened, not sugarcoating it, not putting some little flowers around it, but actually accepting what had happened. And at that point is when everything changed. That
Yes.
that was the point that I noticed that things started to change.
You know, I often use the word surrender in when I talk about my moment like that, that kind of moment where um, I spent a fair amount of time, skirting around what I needed to look at.
Yep.
And then, but do you think, because when I say the word surrender, when I finally surrendered to my circumstances, well, then you're admitting I don't have any of this figured out at all. I don't know where to go from here, but I'm surrendering to the truth. There is something freeing about that, right?
Yeah, it is. For me, again, when I use the word surrender, right? It's like, I see it almost as I am I'm submitting
Yes.
to something that I can't control. I'm submitting. Well, for me, that same word that the synonym for me would be acceptance. I
Yes.
accept that I can't control it. And it gives it a little, for me, it gave it a little more um willingness and the ability to accept it. Like, okay, I know I can't change that. So rather than me saying I surrender to something, I
Mhm.
phrase it as, I accept what has happened. I
I like
accept,
that.
I take responsibility for everything that I did.
Yep.
So for me, it was more of the acceptance. Um, and I could allow other things, people, feelings to come out, and that the reality is. So it's the same word, but for me, I like the word acceptance.
I actually really like that word as well. It takes on a whole new
Yeah,
flavor, doesn't it?
yeah,
So when you made, I mean, that's a huge turning point for anybody in their life to kind of come to that point of acceptance. How did your kids respond to you when I mean, they must have seen a huge change when you
yeah.
started to turn this corner.
So I gotta tell you, that even to this day, um, for some people, and I would definitely say for any kind of relationship when it comes to family, children, spouses, each person um, sees it differently. And
Yep.
you have to accept the fact that your pace of healing, your type of healing, when you healed, how you heal, is totally different from the next person.
Yep.
I had to accept the fact that my oldest daughter healed and accepted differently than I did,
Mhm.
and each of them came around um, to accept my healing and my this new me differently. You know, at
Yep.
one point, the three of them and we weren't on the same sheet of music. And so it took time for them to um, realize, who I was, this new person. Because some people, even our friends or you name it, some people only see you. Um, they can only see you in the light that you were.
Yes.
They can't. They will rather say, well, he used to be this way, or he did these things, so he is this type of person, rather than seeing you for who you are now. And I
Yep.
think that's huge, and we have to understand that people come in our lives for a day, an hour, a year, a lifetime, and everybody has a purpose. Everybody has a moment in time in our space to where that's just what they're for that particular season or that moment.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that helped me was when I realized that my previous wife, she had a purpose in life,
Mhm.
and her purpose was served, and we both had a relationship with God. And so when I looked at it from a spiritual perspective, we all have to, we have a certain time that we're all going to expire.
Yes.
And so I didn't look at the tragedy as, okay, God, why did you do this to me? Why did you do this to me? Because to me that means that I wish it was somebody else and not me. I asked God, um, what is it in these tragedies? What is it that you're going to use me for, where I can help other people? So out of everything that I went through, what is my purpose of going through this, as a man, as a father, as a friend, as a black male? You know,
Yeah.
we don't talk about this. We don't, men in general don't talk about depression, or we don't talk about suicide. We don't talk about things of that nature. But
Yep.
the statistics even show even higher that African American men don't talk about it. The percentages are like out of the roof. And so,
Okay, I didn't know.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, so for me to have the ability to share my story and other black men see what I went
Mhm.
through, what I did, where I am now. It's just a blessing that I have this as a journey to talk to other people, and to
Yeah.
help women that they may be in relationships or married to men that may be struggling with, how do they get this out. They're living with something that they may be holding on to. How do they get it out? And if I
Yeah.
can be that gleam of hope, or that light, or whatever, for they can see of me going from broken to healed, then I can help. If that's my purpose, then that's my purpose.
And that's a beautiful purpose.
Yeah.
Um, I have uh, worked with many couples, and that's a struggle for them.
Yeah.
It's, one path of grief is completely different than the other. Communication breaks down because people don't feel understood. So, you
Yeah.
know, it's so needed, because men and women, our minds are different, and
Mhm.
that works very well together in most times. But in times of grief, sometimes you need to connect with another man. There's certain things about being a husband or a father, that I wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
um, so for you, when you started to go out and speak to people, and when you had mentioned, the higher statistics with Black men. So when you started to spread your message,
Mhm.
what was the response like?
Um, at first, so first of all, I must admit, you have to be all in. You have to be 100% in. Um, and so my core principles that I use that I had to really, um, and I'll use the word now, surrender to. um, I had to surrender to. I could not go out and speak to people, talk to people, write, or do any of this if I was 90% in.
Yeah.
I had to be completely the three words of my these are my three core principles: authenticity, transparency, and vulnerability. And
Yes.
I could not, what I noticed was when I was only 90% in and I wasn't making myself vulnerable on that stage, how could I expect my audience or another man to be vulnerable to me?
Right.
And so that is what I noticed. And Kelly, I went out on the stage one time and I completely bombed. I mean, I was on that stage. I could not connect with the audience. I didn't connect with them. I was up there. I think I had like 30 minutes to speak, and I was 25 minutes into this keynote, and the lady holds up the sign that gives me the notification that I have 5 minutes to start wrapping it up. And I had never talked to the audience. I never
Yeah.
connected to the audience. And I, I get off the stage, and then my current wife, she's there, she's in the audience, and she's like, we're in the car, we get through everything, we get, pack up everything, we get in the car, and I'm just in silence because I knew that I bombed, and I asked her, I say, how did I do? She said, you did okay. And what I noticed was until I became vulnerable on a stage and just completely transparent to the audience and to the people I'm talking to, um, it never worked.
Yeah.
It never worked. And there's when I speak, I look for three different type of people, three different type of groups in the audience, right? And it's pathos, lothos, and ethos. Those are the three people I look for. And so you got the emotional person, and they're hearing the story, and then you got that intellectual person, you got the statistical person, you got all those people, and you may not get all three, you may not get all three, but I was so wrapped up in telling my story until I missed the audience completely. And
Yeah.
I had to go back to the drawing board. I said, okay, you got to do this better. And when I revamped it, right, I was okay, you got 3 minutes, you got 2 to 3 minutes to hit them so hard with something about you that you connect with them right off the bat. And now you got them. And when I changed that formula, I started getting results. When I started, when I changed and started talking to them directly right off the bat, then I started getting more engagement from men. I started getting more engagement from women in the audience. I started getting more calls. It just flowed better, and so that was one of the key things that you have to know your audience. Um, you have to talk directly to the pain that they're struggling with, not your pain. When you
Hmm.
can talk to their pain, then now you have the ability to bring them into your world, But if you automatically go out there and you talk about your pain, they may not understand your pain, but they have pain.
Yes.
And so that's how I had to flip it to, talk about pain in general, and then started to draw where we connect. And once I was able to do that, then I started to notice a difference in the engagement in the audience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, I will tell you, I've had a moment like that too, where I was doing a keynote, and at the end, I just wanted a do-over because I just
Yes.
didn't
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, "Wait a second, can we rewind back that and let me try that again?" Because I didn't feel like I resonated with the audience I was speaking
Yeah.
to at all. And you're right about, and those 3 words, transparent, authentic, and vulnerable. Those to me, it's I read them on your website and I was like, that's so powerful because people know
Yeah.
when
They
you
do.
are up in front of a group, if you are not real with them,
Yep.
they know.
Yep.
And because they want to see themselves in
Mm-hmm.
you, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They In order for them to feel um courageous enough to share their own stories or to come up to you after a keynote or to even share it with a family member after they've heard you
Mm-hmm.
with your story, they have to see themselves in you, and the only way you can do that is if you are completely open and transparent about the good and the bad. And I mean, I'm hearing that as we're talking this morning. You're talking about it wasn't always easy, and we weren't always on the same sheet of music, and because that's reality, that's
Yep.
life. Um, so what has been the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself from this work?
Oh man. If you could see my office, you would see all these big poster board pieces of paper just wrote on with different. I want to think the one thing that, yeah, this is what I want to say. The one thing that I think has helped me tremendously, um, is there's two things, but the first thing is I wanted to have a relationship with the world. And that's how I had to kind of phrase it to get out of my own way of,
Yep.
okay, this is what I want to tell people, rather than just have a relationship with the world. Just talk to people. Just
Mhm.
just be transparent. Just talk to them about because they're having real issues.
Yeah.
And I can't always show up on some social media in this perfect world. Every tie is tied up and everything is all, this and that. I'm like, no, that's superficial,
It
because
is.
people are secretly crying at home.
Yeah.
And for men, they're secretly crying, but they don't show tears.
Yeah.
So I can't always show up in this suit and tie and all spiffy and everything. Now it's like, how can I relate to that 19 or 20-year old, high school college student that is contemplating suicide in his college dorm room if I'm always in
Right.
a tie? But I contemplated suicide. So we have that in common. So instead of talking about me, talk about what got me to the point of thinking about suicide. So now I
Right.
can relate to that 19-year-old, and I'm 54. There's a huge, age gap, but we struggled with the same things. So that
Yeah.
was my thing, is have a relationship with the world, right? The other thing that I did was, and it took some time for me to get here, was I told my wife, I said, hey, I realized at a point to where I was in a situation to where it's me. So now I'm remarried. And with amongst the two of us, we have 5 kids. So you take those 5 people, you take her, and so now you have 6 people, and then there's me. And I'm trying to deal with it all, right? So I'm like,
Yeah.
I just can't do this. I
Yeah.
can't do it. And so I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk to a counselor myself, because I need to figure out for me, right? And I did that. And I said the next step of this was, now let's do couples therapy. Let's go do couples therapy. And it was kind of funny because I'm a coach and my therapist, she was like, I don't know how this is going to work. You being a coach and I'm a therapist. So we'll see. We'll see how this is going to work. And I said, what I would do, I would take off the coach's hat and I would just
Yeah.
be in the session, right? And so one of the things that I finally did was in a session, I told my wife and I told the therapist, I said, hey, I need to find my voice. I'm in a
Yeah.
house, I'm in a relationship, I'm married, with a family, I'm around friends, but I don't even know my own voice. And that was a huge point because it made my wife say, wait a minute, what do you mean you don't have a voice? And then the therapist was like, okay, what does that mean? And when I realized who I was and where I had my voice could be heard and I knew how to project, um, that was huge. That was
Yeah.
huge. And those two things right there really kind of catapulted me even to the next level as a man, or even just being in existence, um in the moment,
Yeah.
we get so wrapped up in like how many times, how many people do you know that always say they don't have time for a vacation? you
Yes,
know
lots.
we're always working, but life is so short, and I learned that at the age of 40. So it's like, you know we have to we have to prepare for tomorrow. But if there's something that you want to do today and it's not going to hurt anybody, and it's just something that may be stupid, but it may make that just may be your moment. You just want to do something stupid and just crazy, then who cares about what other people think? And we're so wrapped about what the perception and what other people may think about us.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
And I mean, I
crucial.
think social media plays a part in that too, right? Like you said, it's this false version of self. And so
Yeah,
then
it
when we
does.
wanna be true and silly or goofy or do something, like you said, crazy that you've thought about doing, and not to hurt anybody else, but just, live your life.
I mean, how many
We
how many like movie stars or actors or artists or these people with all this money, how many people have we heard over the last, let's say, 5, 10 years that have killed themselves
Yep.
because they weren't happy, they were struggling,
Yeah.
and so you can't say it's about, if I have this amount of money I'm going to be happy. You can't say that. some
No.
of some of the some of the one of the things I learned about my wife, right? It's like this. So the first thing she did to me was she gave me this book, the five languages of love
Oh,
language,
yes.
whatever.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I hesitated for like so many months or whatever to read it, and I would read like page a page a page, and but what I realized was, um I learned some things about her, right? Where it's like she likes the little small things, like when, like, if let's say if she gets up and she goes to work, she may write me a note in front of the coffee pot that just with a little heart to say, hey, have a wonderful day, whatever. And I may get up an hour or so later, and when I go to make my tea or whatever, I see this note. Just little stuff that's free.
Yep.
That doesn't cost anything. And so I noticed it's little things like that make life great. And those are the things that helped me heal as well. Because at one point, Kelly, I said love died.
Mm,
Love died. When my previous wife, when she died, I was not going to love anybody because I didn't want anybody. I didn't want to get close to people.
yep.
Because if that person were to leave me, then I'll be hurt again. And I'm gonna give you another story when I knew I was just gone. So we would go to like family and friends Christmas parties, right?
Mhm.
And so this one particular Christmas, there's two Christmases. So this one particular Christmas, um, I like cigars, right? And there's this one cigar that I like, and they're very hard to get, and I can't even find them anymore, right? And so my wife and my kids, they were able to find, they got me a box of them. When I opened that box, I was like just so happy. And the statement was, wow, that's the first time we've seen you that happy in years. I'm like, okay. So I
Hmm.
kept it moving, and then we went to, like, I think it was like the next year we went to a friend's Christmas party, and she had this game to where um you had to pull out, like, you couldn't see what was wrote on the paper, so
Yep.
they were characters, right? And then you would tape the character to your back, right? So you don't know the character that you are or who you are. You could only ask yes or no questions to everybody else there. And so as I'm going around asking questions, I would, people would look and see who the character was on my back. And I would hear comments, people like, "Oh, yep, that's him. Oh, yeah, that is definitely. Oh, yeah, that's him." And I said, you know what? I already know who it is. I already know who the person. I already know who the character is. And they was like, "No, you don't." I said, "Yes, I do." You know who I guessed?
Who?
Scrooge.
No.
And I guessed it right off the bat.
That's
And
who it was.
that's who it was. And at that point, I was like, "Wow, have I become that person?"
Mm,
And I knew from that point I had to change my whole outlook. I
yeah.
could not walk around not smiling, being this Scrooge person. And from that point on, I just started just doing stupid stuff and having fun.
That's good. And your message, so you then translated this message translated into a book, and then and then you are also, um, a world-renowned speaker. So tell me how, when you wrote the book, what was that like for you to be so open and raw?
It even took time. So I didn't start out just to write a book. That was not the purpose. All right. What helped me get through everything, my outlet was journaling. I
Yeah.
would just write, and every day I wrote about something. When I was on the train to get to work, if I was, carpooling, or if I was on the bus or something, if I'm at lunch, but when I was at lunch, I would just, take my little book and I would just write. If I saw somebody weird walking down the street, I would write about the person. And, like, we look at the person as weird, but are we the one that's weird? Why do we have
Yeah.
that type of perception? I would just write about everything. And over time, I think I had probably wrote like 300 pages of just this inspirational, you know. And somebody said to me, "Why don't you write a book?" And I was like, "I don't write no book. I'm not a, that's not me." And
Yeah.
so they connected me. They sent me this information to a person, and I reached out to the person. I said, "Hey, somebody told me to reach out to you." And so what she said, "Send me 10 pages. Just send me 10 pages of what you wrote." So I took a picture of the 10 pages because it was in a book, it was in a journal.
Yeah.
And I sent it to her, and she immediately picked up the phone and called me. She said, "This is amazing. You have to put this in some type of format so others can read it."
Yeah.
And it was stuff in there, like, when I'm sitting in the hospital room, just looking at my previous wife, when she was just, when she's taking medications and she's not in the, not there. I'm writing about how I feel and what I'm seeing and how do I get through this and what I'm doing today. And that turned into the first book. It turned into the journey of a faith walker, because the only way I got through any of that was my faith in God. That was the
Yeah.
only way. And so that turned into the first book, right? And it did pretty well. It wasn't this huge bestseller, and but it did well. And when people read the book, when I would see them or they would make comments, I would be like, "Wow, let me go back and read that." Because sometimes for like 5 or 6 years, Kelly, it was like I lived outside of myself. It was
Yeah.
like I'm over here and I'm looking at myself, and I mean, it took some time to remember things that I did or said, or during that time. It was just so unreal. It was so surreal to where it's like, wow. And I literally had somebody contact me on Instagram, and this guy, I had never met him in my entire life. He was literally telling me that he was about to end his life. He was driving up in the mountains in Denver or somewhere. I think he was in New Jersey somewhere, and he was literally telling me what he was doing. And he said he
Mhm.
saw something that I posted that changed his life. And it's things like
Oh,
that you don't know the impact that you may make on other people's lives. And so that was
you
the
do.
first book. And so then, as kind of some time went on, I was approached by someone else to be a part of a book anthology. And so
Yep.
me and seven other people, I think it was 10 other people, we wrote this other book together. And so that kind of catapulted me into, talking to various groups, talking to various people. It really got me into coaching and mentoring. And that's kind of just taken on a different level. And so now being a leader and being being an organization and working, now it's like, okay, how do I take what I've been through and I can help leaders and I can
Yes.
help people in organizations in the workforce. And what I noticed was, there was so many people struggling with, anxiety and depression and things of that nature. But we have leaders that are that are supervising, managing them, and they don't know how to deal with that. And
That's so
so
true.
that gave me the opportunity to bring my talents and my gifts into leadership development programs. And now I'm able to talk to leaders and say, hey, how can you lead people if you don't know yourself? So for me, the first step of leadership is self-discovery. You have to know yourself. You have to know, that's the baseline of my pyramid, is knowing
Mhm.
yourself. And then the middle piece of the pyramid is all about change management. Once you know yourself, now you can make a change in your life and help other people that you may lead or supervise. And now,
Yeah.
as you get to the top of the pyramid, now you're talking more about the strategic level, that big overarching level, the executive level, the CEO level. But again, if you are a CEO or senior executive and you're sitting in this isolated bubble, then you're not lead and you're detached from your organization. That's a problem in itself,
It is.
and so our organizations are hurting. There's low self-esteem, there's toxic work environments, organizations are not being flexible, um, low employee engagement, employee dissatisfaction. And so that's how I have been able to kind of um, insight or get into organizations and talk to leaders about their organizations, because you have employees that are struggling at work. You know,
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
And you see, I mean, honestly, everybody that walks in through the door of any organization has something going
Yep,
on.
yep,
They're dealing with something. And every leader who sits in that corner office is
yep,
also dealing with something.
yep,
And then they walk in through the doors to their company, and then the responsibilities of their job is just put on top of whatever they're dealing with. And I
yes,
remember when I started my career as a nurse, and one of the things one of the professors said when I was in university was, you need to leave your problems at the door because
yeah.
you're here to care for other people.
How do you do
And
that?
I took that to
You
heart,
know,
right? I did. I
right?
was like, "Okay, leave it right here at the door." But as time went on, I was like, "How is that even possible? How can
Yeah,
you leave stuff at the door when you're taking care of a child that reminds you of your own child,
yep,
or a parent that reminds you of your parent who passed away a few years before? You can't leave that stuff at the
you
door."
can't, you can't.
And you shouldn't, because that in itself, like, I remember when I would take care of people who had cancer. My mother passed away from cancer.
I'm sorry to hear.
Thank you. And when I would go in, it was that experience,
Mhm.
my personal experience that I was supposedly supposed to leave at the door,
Yeah,
that made me a better nurse, not only for that patient, but for that patient's family.
yeah,
And so I think just in general, in the way that companies run, whether it be a privately held company, a public one, healthcare, it doesn't matter. We have to get away from that, "Oh, we're professionals and we're not." No, we're people first, and we have to take care of the people part of it first, and that's what makes a great company. If your people feel like you see them and you hear them
Yeah.
and you're taking care of them, that's when you have success. Is that that's kinda your that's what I was gathering
Oh
from your
yeah,
message.
that's huge. That's where organizations, a major number. There's so many organizations right now that are missing that mark, and they really missed it post COVID. If they did
Oh,
not um, make a pivot during COVID, they're hurting. That is so big right now because to your point, how do you leave that at the door, right? But what I have seen is we have leadership is my thing, right? That's my baby. That's my orbit. That's my world. And when I study leadership, I studied it, and you look at it from the 1900s, right? We have this authoritative style. It's transactional. It's I'm the leader, you're the follower, and go go go, right?
yeah,
That has moved, that has morphed and evolved to now we're into this servant leadership, this transformational leadership, this authentic leadership. Now just think, we we weren't there years ago, right?
no,
And that's this traditional style structure where it's leave it at the door, check it at the door. When I was in the Marine Corps, one of the biggest things that they used to tell us, hey, if we wanted you to have a wife or a life, we would have issued you one.
oh my gosh.
But how can I effectively be on the battlefield over in some other country, not thinking about my family back at home?
Right.
You can't do that. And I
No.
was on a podcast. I had somebody on my podcast. Her name is Dr. Shabir, and she's a physician, and she made this statement that is like, how can physicians, who's taking care of the physicians?
Yeah.
You all are nurses. You're in this world where everybody comes to you in pain and they're hurting, and you're hurting and you have pain. Who's helping you? And so that is so to the point to where it's like we have to learn how to um what word am I looking for? We have to be flexible
Mhm.
and understand this. See, this whole work life balance thing is so hard and difficult for some leaders and organizations to understand. If I have to take care of my sick mother, then I have to take care of my sick mother. I cannot be 100% focused at work if I know my mother or my family member is hurting.
Right.
you know but the structure that we have, that we're still set. Most organizations want you to work 9, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. Who says that's the right formula? If I
Right.
can do my work in 4 hours and I can go home, or this remote work thing is killing organizations. They want people back into the office, but why though? you
Yeah.
know why do they need you in the office? Now, some situations you have to be, like healthcare workers, you have to be, a certain time of day.
Yeah.
But if I'm at home and I work 4 hours and I go and walk my dog and I come back, I don't care, you just walk your dog. If that's a stress reliever for you, and then you come back and you give me 2 more awesome hours, or your work productivity has increased, you're engaged, you're a healthier person, that's the person I want. And you
Yeah.
said it to the if organizations are not valuing, if they don't value their employees, then they're losing. They're at a loss.
Yeah.
They're lost.
I remember being part of a merger of 2, companies, and, there was a comment made, and it was, "If we don't do this right, you know that the strongest swimmers jump ship first,"
Yep.
right? And it was talking about that valuable piece
Yep.
of the team that was looking to the leaders and saying, You handling this okay? Because I'm not going to stick around
Mhm.
if this chaos is what it's going to be all about."
Yeah.
And it's, this model, and like you said, post COVID, why do we need everybody back in the office
Yeah.
if they are performing,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's not applicable for every situation, but deal with those people as individuals,
Mhm.
because you don't know what else they're juggling. And when I think about those strong people leaving first, that just tells me we have to we have to turn this upside down. And you said something about being a servant leader, and that is such a strong,
Yeah.
strong way to approach it
Yeah.
because, you know, how else is the company staying open without the employees? It's
You know,
not
and
just the guy in the corner office can't
yeah,
do it all on his own, right?
and it's
And
not just that, it's what is the average, so when you look at this modern organization now, right? Let's call it that because that's what it's modern, right? What is the average time you think an employee stays in an organization these days?
hmm, 3 years?
Yeah, about 3 to 5 years at the most.
Yep.
Back, early when you had more factories and that structure of punching the clock, people stay there 30 years.
Yep.
They will lure you to for 30 years, 20, 30, 40 years, get the pension there, whatever. But as people as we became more modern and more technical, technologically advanced, we do so much quicker. And if an employee stays in an organization past 3 to 5 years, it's because they see something there that they want.
Yep.
But most people, 3 to 5 years, and like you say, if they sense chaos and confusion, and if they don't see something in it for them there in that organization, then they're gone.
They
They're
are.
gone.
They
They're gone.
it's not the same as, I remember my father went to work after he finished high school in
Mhm.
a paper mill, and
Yep.
that's where he worked until his retirement.
Yep.
It's just not that way anymore, and I do notice I have a son who's 27. I do notice that they are far more aware of work-life balance and
Yes.
what they want to see than
Yes.
I ever was. I
Yeah.
had no awareness of that
Yeah.
until I was totally burnt out, and then I was like,
There you
"Oh,
go.
I need to balance this,"
Yep.
right?
Mm.
So hopefully that generation coming behind us, that this will be kinda, more of a normal approach for them. What would you say to a person like that who's in their early 20s? They are just starting out in the workforce. What would you say? How should they approach that work-life balance and navigating that work situation that focuses on their well-being and mental health?
Yeah. So that's huge. I think so. What I do understand now is when you're in your, I think, I can't remember how he actually said it, but how the gentleman said it. He said in your 20s and 30s, you kind of just out there. You're kind of all over the place. And in your 30s and in your 30s, you kind of start to get it. In your 40s, you get it in your 50s. So it's so you there's phases in life, right?
Yep.
I would say I tell my son, he's 25 now. Yeah, all three of them under, yeah, one's birthday today. But I tell them all, when you're in your 20s and your 30s, enjoy life. Travel the world. Don't be scared to take a job that may be in another country. Um, just try everything. I still have family members and friends that are in the same area they grew up in. They have never, some of them have never even flown on an airplane.
Yep.
That to me is not life. So I would tell them to, if you don't want to join the military, um, then you know you get in an organization and see if they have international opportunities, even if it's just for 6 months. Um,
Mhm.
learn the learn what other countries, you know, go and work in their workforce for a minute, because there's so many liberties and things that we have in the United States that other countries don't have, and I think you get a better understanding. I think everybody should join the military for 2 years, you
Mm.
know, to get a true understanding of what it what it means to be an American citizen. Um, so I would say travel. I would say explore. I would say try various industries. Be flexible and open. If you have a degree in business, you don't have to just always work in a corporate office. You can take that degree or some portion of your degree, and you can work in a medical field, or
Yeah.
in car sales. Do just try it all. That's what I would tell the 27, 28, 30 year old. Try as much as you can before you make, because the average person is going to go through probably about 5 or 7 jobs before they find that one job they like anyway.
That's
But that's
true.
what I would say. I
Yeah.
would say, be flexible. um
Yeah.
be like a sponge and soak up as much knowledge as you can
Oh,
from
yes.
older folks, from just people that are in the places where you want to be. Just soak up that information. It could be somebody your same age, but they may have the job that you want to have. Just
Yeah.
ask questions, be like a sponge and soak up information from them. Everything is about information.
It is, and I mean, learning even how to navigate certain conversations when you first
Yeah.
start in a work situation. It's difficult when stuff is wrong and you have to, confront a situation that's uncomfortable. I remember paying attention to some really smart people. I always like to kind of sit next to the smarter people in the room and pay attention to how they navigated things. How did they approach this situation? How did they research for a certain
Yeah.
project? You're right. Be open to everything. Being
Yeah.
that sponge, um, I think that was one of the best things that I could have ever done in my career. I can just speak for myself in that, and I 110% agree. Um, so what about, and I know that you've worked with them. So what about the VP or the COO or the CEO who is in a company and they are looking around at the landscape of their company and they see things they want to improve upon. They see that they want to be more transparent and
Mhm.
authentic. What do you say to them? Like, what is your approach for them when they come to you and say, "Help me"?
Yeah. So I think my approach is first asking them, why do they want this change.
Yep.
They have to understand, why they want the change, because when you can get to the why, the real why, when you can peel back the layers and get to the real why, that's when you can effectively help them implement the change they're looking for.
Yeah.
So if they were to say, well, I see a lot of my my employee engagements are down, or I have a high turnover rate, you know, is the real root of the problem that you have employees leaving, or could it be that your layers of hierarchy, your layers of leaders and your managers, maybe they're actually the real issue that's forcing your employees to leave. So you have to
Right.
get to the real root of the problem. What is it you're really trying to get to?
Yeah.
Now, the issue is it performance based? Is it So I would go and say, okay, so if you're saying that you have a lot of employees that are leaving, there's a couple of things I would look at. Okay. Do you have a lot of EEO complaints? Do you have a lot
Mhm.
of grievances? Okay. Then the next question would be, well, what are the reasonings, the reasons behind people that are filing the grievances?
Yep.
And then if you see a consistency, if your themes are, well, me and the supervisor, me and the manager, me and this, now your problem may not be the reason that they're leaving is because you have a leadership problem. And so now
Yeah.
you may need to get leadership development to your leaders. So that could be the real issue. Another example would be Um, what if your organization has been around for 20 years, right? It's a solid organization.
Mhm.
And your mission and vision statement was developed 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And
Right.
your mission and vision statement is not reflective of the demographics of your organization. Your mission and vision statement may be outdated. So you're
Yeah.
not attracting the right customer,
Yeah.
or you can't recruit the right employees because your vision and your mission statement is outdated and may be offensive in some way.
Yeah.
So it could be as simple as your mission and vision statement, right? Another thing I always look at is, does your C-suite reflect the demographics of your workforce?
Oh, I love that one.
If your
Yeah.
C-suite is conservative white males, and everywhere that on the wall, all you see is a conservative white male, then if your demographic of your employees is not reflective of that, now your employees doesn't feel as though the C-suite even understands where the workforce is even coming from. You're disconnected. If
Yeah.
you have more men in your higher levels of staff than women, you know, then you may be perceived as a sexist organization,
Yeah.
or do you have any women at the higher levels of leadership? you know do you have any what is are there any black females? Are there any Asian? Are there any, so how does that diversity and inclusion look across your entire organization? So you got to really get to the root of the problem. And that's where I spend a lot of time with them
Mhm.
individually is, okay, let's bring in your staff and let's see what your C-suite looks like.
Yeah.
Let me observe a staff meeting. Let me talk to various groups to see what their opinion is of you as a leader, the CEO, the company, the organization. And when you can get all of that information and all that data and you present it to them, if they accept the data and they really want to implement change, that's when you get the real change.
Yeah.
If they're not willing to accept, the findings of the data and say, okay, I got it, and push it down, um, that's that's the meat of change. The other thing that I've noticed and the data shows is that a lot of organizations are going back to this top down leadership approach
Mm.
where everything is being forced from the top C-suite down rather than kind of a bottom up or middle out or something like that. So there's a
Yep.
lot of things going on in organizations right now that um, they got to pivot. They have to make the change. They have to.
That is so true. And I mean, when you think about, you were talking about the data points that you present them back with, employees notice
Hmm.
if you not only if you accept the data points, but if you're gonna change right along with them.
Yeah.
If you are a leader in an organization and you're like, "Oh, well, we have to lower absentee rates and overturn and we want to improve upon this, this, and this," but employees can then look and say, "Well, the guys in the big offices, well, they didn't seem to change too much with what
Hmm.
they're doing."
Yeah.
That doesn't work, right? That's not authentic. And so I think, and I mean, I'm not picking on the guys in the offices by
Yeah.
any stretch, but I think where we are right now, and this comes from being post COVID, where I think we were all faced with our mortality in a very
Yeah.
real and scary way. Um, we we don't have to live in that kind of or work in that kind of environment, that we
Yeah.
can have something that works for everybody, kind of that win-win agreement that I
Yeah.
know Stephen Covey always used to talk about a win-win agreement, for people, so that you could see how I can succeed, but so can you. And I
Yeah.
think if an employee can leave at the end of the day and say, "My boss wants me to succeed too,"
Yeah.
that employee's not going anywhere.
You're absolutely right, and that's the gold nugget right there. But it takes it back to you know, grief and and hurting and pain and when employees feel as though they're valued, they're heard. Um, something that's small. I remember a supervisor bought these little plastic looking gold coins. And anytime an employee did something great, she just gave him a coin. And it was just it was not money, it was a non-monetary gift, but she just made that person feel valued and
Yeah.
emotional and just attached. And when we can get back into just really seeing people for people and
Mhm.
and who they are and understand Edward may be having an off day today, you know um you know you know have the flexibility to say, hey, I'm not on it today. But when we can lead from that perspective of being empathetic, in this whole emotional intelligence, this whole piece of you, Kelly, there's like 15 styles of leadership out there, but we
Yeah.
only talk about three. And these new forms of in this modern environment um is so new, and it's scary to certain organizations and leaders. Hey, we have to understand that our employees are going through a lot.
Yeah.
And if we're not looking at it from that lens and we're only focused on the result, then we're losing it. We gotta be, we have to be um knowledgeable that I may supervise 10 employees, but not all 10 of them are going to be 100% every day.
Yeah.
you know we gotta be in a relationship with them to understand who they are as people.
And I think I mean, if someone is not having a great day, and I mean, I've been there, I'm sure we all have at a certain point in our careers, and you have someone who's managing you and saying, "You know what? I see that you're not having a good day, but there's so many good days you have had.
Yeah.
So take a breath if you need to take a moment, if you need to take the afternoon and sort through some things, or just that little bit of humanity shared, right?
Yep.
It goes miles and miles.
I mean, think
Someone,
about this, Kelly. Now, this is another driver for me. This just pushes me. I got fired. I got terminated from my job.
yeah,
Not even 3 months, 2 months after my previous wife passed away, and he looked at me with a straight face, no sympathy, no emotional, nothing. And he said, "Well, Edward, I'm going to have to let you go." And I thought it was a joke, you
yeah,
know. And he said, "Well, unfortunately, the projects and the tasks that you are responsible for fell through the cracks, and we lost some of those contracts, and blah 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 blah." Just that right there told me that there are people in positions of authority that do not care about their workforce.
yeah.
So why are they in those positions?
That's a very good question.
Yeah,
That's a very good question because obviously, there was so much going on in your life at that moment. I mean, the grief is one complicating thing that you deal with, but you also had children to figure this out with. You had a lot on your
Yep,
plate. You're right. And if employers, if we can't take the time to see that that person is a human just like we are,
yep,
and deserves patience and love and respect,
yep.
um, then eventually, and it's kind of you see it in a longer term kind of view, but what they don't realize is their company's going to fail
Oh yeah, something is
eventually.
going to crack. Yeah, something is going to
Yeah,
crack sooner or later.
It's not go may not happen tomorrow, but it's gonna
Yep.
happen because people will go where they are valued.
Yes.
That's
That's it.
They will, and we talked about them only staying 3 to 5 years, so you have a finite amount of time to show them that your organization is the place to be.
Exactly.
So, we need to train better leaders, and that's why we are very lucky to have you, because you can go
Hey,
into a company
I
and
love
you
it.
can help them. You
Yep.
can help them see that, right?
Yep.
So, before we finish up, and I know I've kept you longer than I should, but this has been such a great chat. Um, Tell people where they can find your books, and if they wanna talk to you about their needs for their company, how they find you.
Kelly, I made it simple for myself. So so it is simple as can be. Any social media you think of, Instagram, um, LinkedIn, my webpage, Twitter. It's edward.e.mosley.com. That's it.
Perfect.
So if you Google, or type in www.edward.e.mosley.jr.com, that's the web page. All of my contact information is on there. You can book a discovery session. You can book, me to speak. Everything is there. So any social media platform is Edward E. Mosley Jr.
I love your Instagram feed too, by the way. I love the little nuggets of wisdom that you share.
Thank
It's
you.
really good. And your website, with some of the articles and blogs and stuff, I like that too. I was
Yeah.
going through. I may go back to that now this weekend and read a little bit more.
Cool.
Um, so in my just to close out, every guest that I've had, I like to ask what they're grateful for. And I have a global gratitude group called Just One Little Thing. And so I started it in my grief. And the reason I called it Just One Little Thing was because some days just one little thing was all I could find
Mhm.
to be thankful for. And so we used it as a tool because my son, who's 27 now, is 12. And that's the way we got through. We were going to look for little things to be grateful for, even though we were hurting. We weren't denying what was going on because we were a mess, but we said we're gonna find one little thing. So one little thing, the changing fall leaves, the very thankful in my own house today um, that the hurricane that turned into a tropical storm, that we didn't lose, too many trees, or because a lot of people had a lot of damage in my our neighborhood, and so I'm very thankful for that. So what are you thankful for today?
Wow. Kelly, I am thankful for life.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for life. I try not to take anything for granted, and I'm really thankful for love
Yeah.
and just happiness. I am truly in a place of just enjoying life. Now I had to learn patience, man. My wife, she jumps on me all the time. That one word, well, my goodness, I'm not a patient person. I wasn't a patient person. Um, but I had to learn that. And so I'm just thankful for just the ability just to just to live.
Yeah, the gift of another day. I mean, not
Yeah.
everybody else is guaranteed that, are they? None of us are. And
Yeah.
so when you wake up, you gotta give thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Edward,
the other thing I will add to that, if I may, is, you know, when you look back, for me, when I look back over everything that has happened in my life, I can get through anything
yeah.
because I've already been down so low to where it's like, hey, you can only go up. And now
Yeah.
I'm familiar with what chaos looks like, what it smells like, what it feels like. So when I see myself kind of turning back into something, nope, you've been there before. Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a lesson that you don't forget, is it? I know that, I feel quite humble about I never forget the perspective that was given to me by
Yeah.
tragedy.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and not to say that you're thankful for anything bad that ever happens in your life, but I do give thanks for the wisdom that I gained from it.
Yeah.
It made me a better human. I
Yep.
hope. I'm trying. I keep trying
Yeah.
every day.
Hey, we're a work in progress. It is, and that's the beauty of it. You one day may be so so, and the next day you're just awesome. So, you
Yep.
know, yep, one
And
day
it's
at a
giving
time.
yourself the space to learn every day.
Yep.
Edward, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for
Oh,
taking the
you're
time to
welcome.
talk to
Yeah,
me. This was great. Everybody, go get Edward's books, look at his website, and if you are a leader in a company that needs help, I want you to reach out to him because I think he could make all the difference.
cool.
Thank you so much, everybody, and we will see you on the next episode.
All right, bye bye.